Time.
Oh my gosh. Um, next time let's use Restream. It's
There
easy.
you go.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. We're live.
Hi. Very
Hi,
wonderful to be
Sabrina.
on here. How are you? How
I'm
are
good.
you?
How are you?
Doing very, very well. It is such a pleasure to be able to connect with you. And I see that we're live, which is fantastic. My name's Sabrina Renee Kinkle with Kelber Consulting, and I am so incredibly excited today. I'm here with Dr. Amy V. Sanchez, who is a neuropsychologist, an organizational consultant, as well as an executive coach. And as a neuropsychologist, she has dedicated over 20 years of her career to understanding how the brain impacts behavior and applying these psychological principles to improve business and workplace outcomes. She's also a Forbes Coach Council member, and her work has been featured all over, really. ABC, CBS, Fox News, Wall Street, Forbes. So, really, really excited to be here with you today, Dr. Sanchez. Thanks so much for taking time today to chat.
Absolutely. My pleasure to be here with you on this Monday afternoon.
Fantastic. So I'm excited because a lot of us as female leaders really look at what are some things that we can do to take our success to the next level. And I know that you work with a lot of senior level leaders to do just that. So what we want to talk about today is how do we leverage those five superpowers of the most successful women leaders that are out there. I want to start by talking to you a little bit about executive presence. And this is a topic that we hear a lot about. It's widely discussed, particularly in leadership circles. But you have a very interesting take on this topic. And I'd love for you to talk about what this take is.
Sure, sure. I'd be happy to. When we think about executive presence, there are some visual ideas that come to mind about what that looks like, especially if you're a woman who has been leading for many years working in senior leadership. You kind of envision yourself as this person when it comes time to show up. And that's kind of what executive presence is. It's that spot on confidence that you have where you know your stuff like the back of your hand, having that gravitas and the ability to be able to command a room and really kind of take control. But I think what sometimes gets underestimated, if you will, about the idea of executive presence is that it's not a one size fits all approach. And so, what can happen is when things that are critical with being able, critical to you being able to deliver yourself confidently, impact upon your presentation, it can cause even the most seasoned presenter to get knocked off their game. One
Mm.
of those things that can happen is if you're dealing with really high stakes situations, if you're having a high stakes conversation, if you're in an interview, if you're maybe presenting something you've never done before for the first time, or you're in front of key decision makers and you're concerned about a promotion, a pivot, or a transition, and you really have to make a good impression, you may have the tendency to be able to show up in times where you feel practiced, rehearsed, and maybe calmer,
Mm.
more confidently. But when there are times where your confidence can waver, those may be times when your executive presence may break down. And so that's the nexus at which I meet many of my clients, is working on the mindset piece and being able to help them really maintain consistency and stability with their presence over time, regardless of the situation. And so, one of those things that I see cropping up with many women that work in senior leadership is they deal with the nuances of leadership, having to deal with things like gender bias, microaggressions, dealing with pushback that can oftentimes cause that process to happen from an outside in approach where there's an environmental trigger that causes that internal waiver of confidence and may cause a breakdown. And so we work on techniques, we work on strategies, we work on skills with being able to help them manage their executive presence, but also leverage their emotions in a way that's going to help them show up their best every time. Can I share a client story with you?
I would love that. Yes, please do.
Okay, cool. Sometimes I get all in my head when I talk about the mindset piece because I really get so passionate about it. But a real example of that is I work with a client who is in senior leadership. She was working as a VP for an organization. And this woman, she was stellar in regards to her professional background. She had a wealth of experience. She brought a lot to the table. But unfortunately, she would show up in these administrative meetings and she would be the center of attention. She'd either have to ask a question, respond to something, or deal with pushback. And her confidence would start to waver. And this very capable, confident woman would start having trouble with being able to speak articulately. She would stumble over her words. She'd become overly self-critical. She'd overthink her responses. And she didn't show up as magnificently as she knew that she could. So we worked on, 3 quick ways of helping her be able to target that and course correct. We first had to make a decision, is this an inside out problem? Meaning, is this something originating from the inside that's exhibiting itself on the outside? Or is there an environmental trigger that's happening that's causing you to respond in this way? And so what we had to look at was what blind spots might have been there that she wasn't aware of before that could be operating as she's in these high stress situations. And once we were able to get to the root to it, the essence of it was, her concerns about being judged unfairly and being evaluated because she was a woman of color, one of only, working in a senior leadership position. And she was concerned about how people would perceive her or misperceive her. And many of these messages had stemmed from external triggers that had happened early on in her career, but now were showing up in this situation where she was leading at the highest level of her career ever, doing something she'd never done before. So once we were able to get to the root of that, then we started working on the outside in, which was helping her take an inventory of her accomplishments, her achievements, everything that she had done that had been fantastic for that particular employer, and basically was her street cred. Why did they give you the job? Why did they invest in you? Why are you the answer to the problem that they are trying to solve? And once she was reminded of how great she was, how powerful she was, it reignited her purpose and her why, about why she was there and what she had to do. And so once she was able to be conscious and aware of what she was doing, then she was able to circumvent that cycle that had been happening every time that she showed up in those meetings. And so rather than focusing on just the technical aspects of what she was doing, she was able to feel free and confident enough to be able to even self-promote while she was there in those situations in a very passive way that helped to strengthen her influence and authority in those positions.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I imagine you see probably a lot of common challenges that come up with female leaders. What would you say are some of the common challenges that you see, when it comes to their career positioning in
Mhm.
particular?
Yeah, definitely. I'll use my wording for this.
Okay.
If you ask my clients, they may not say that that's the initial issue, but just for the interest of time, it does come down to issues of confidence. Whether it's they're a confident person that at times is not as confident as they could be,
Mm.
or if they have more pervasive problems with confidence that are related to low self esteem or them doubting themselves or maybe even sabotaging themselves unknowingly. So, confidence is kind of an umbrella issue. The other piece is maintaining peak mindset. How can they stay the most positive when they're dealing with negative or stressful environments? That encompasses things like work life balance and being able to just stay in full mental alertness as you're dealing with highly stressful work situations. And the last umbrella has to do with that growth mindset piece, and it looks different for everyone, but for some of my clients, it has to do with being able to think outside the box and being able to be strategic in their thinking and maintain an enterprise wide mentality as they're going about solving challenges of their day. This can even deal with issues related to managing microaggressions, systemic bias, and issues related to perfectionism, being able to manage and collaborate versus feeling like you have to have your hands in everything, and
Mm.
being able to trust your team to be able to let it go. So those are some of the things that I work on with people, and overall that undergirds the issue of them just becoming stronger leaders, working on their executive presence, and being able to encompass strategic problem solving.
That's fantastic. And I know, just pivoting a little bit, you and I have talked a lot about the fact that another challenge that comes up a lot is how to deal with conflict,
Yes.
and how do you do that effectively. And we know that in the workplace, particularly as senior level leaders, that's something that's going to come up a
Mm-hmm.
lot.
Mm-hmm.
What are a few ways that women can approach having difficult conversations in the workplace?
Yes, this issue of conflict is really a multi-level complex kind of conversation. But essentially, what I'm talking about here is when I work with women, we're focusing on three main things. One is identifying which issues are worth confronting, i.e., what hill is worth dying on today, because there's just so
Mm,
many, right? The second thing is knowing what you want to get out of the conversation. You know, you have to have the conversation, but what is it you want to get out of it? Because it can derail so quickly if you're not focused. And then the last thing is being able to keep your emotions in check, and to be able to, in some uh, cases when it requires it, to be able to take the emotion out of the conversation and stay very factual, practical, and strategic. And sometimes that's hard to balance. And if you add emotion in there, it's just kind of this process where you have to multitask. You have to manage your emotion and then do all of those other things as far as leveraging what needs to happen in the conversation. But like I was saying, it's one of these things where it's sometimes can be hard to zero in on what is that issue that you want to target, because it can be very complex. And so really I support my clients in being able to gain the clarity, the strategy that they need to be able to do that, and identifying the why. um, I'll share another example with you. I had a client who she was having an issue with a male colleague. And what was happening is during departmental meetings, this male colleague would overtalk her and would
mm,
continuously kind of diminish her presence and authority in meetings. Well, it was having a ripple effect because my client was in a position of leadership, although this male colleague had been with the company longer. And so there was a lot of, we never did that before, or you don't know because you're new here, that kind of thing.
mm,
And so, during the meeting, her team was also present, and it would cause kind of this ripple effect in regards to these microaggressions that were happening. And so we had to make sure that we were able to help her dive into resolving the conflict in the most optimal way. So for her, I think it's very important. I think it's important for women in general when these microaggressions happen, is to be able to have a safe place to deal with your feelings about what's happening and what's occurring. Because sometimes you can feel like, am I crazy? Is this really happening? Is this person really doing this? And then once you realize that it is really happening, okay, well, how can I feel about it? I know I can't feel anything about it because maybe I can't do anything about it, but the feelings are still there because it can be frustrating and it can be maddening, right?
mm,
And so I think it's important to address those feelings head on. And so that's what we're able to do in coaching, is really have an outlet to safely express those emotions. And then once we're able to deal with those emotions, then we're able to identify the strategy. So, with this client in particular, we were able to address, once we dealt with the emotions, address the main concerns that she wanted to deal with this colleague on. And then remind her that as she's having this conversation, I call it to leave a space for grace.
mm.
Because
I
if, for
love that.
instance, yes, if, for instance, this is happening and she shared this with this colleague and he's like, I didn't even know I was doing that, I'm so sorry. Then you don't go in there with guns blazing, right?
Mm,
But if it's one of these issues where, maybe the colleague doesn't cop to it, they know it's happening, and they feel like you've kind of checked them, if you will, then the third thing comes into play, which is it allows you to set the boundary regardless. You set the boundaries and the expectations for future interactions going forward. Because essentially you're saying, hey, I'm putting you here on notice. This was my experience with this issue. This is how I expect our conversations to go. This is what I would like, so that
mm.
if you have to revisit that later on, there's already been a conversation about expectations. There's already been a conversation about how that person's behaviors or what have you, or the conflict is causing an issue. And so then you're not having to reinvent the wheel. So that's just some ways that I support my clients in being able to have difficult conversations.
That's fantastic. Oh, I love that. I love that story. That is really, really powerful.
Thank
Extremely.
you.
And I imagine that one of the times within organizations where we see, a lot of issues that could potentially come up where
Hmm.
having difficult conversations is concerned is when organizations are experiencing any area of organizational change.
Hmm.
Can you share with us some suggestions for helping women embrace both organizational change and risk taking more
Hmm.
assertively?
Yeah, I definitely can. It's another one of these issues that's a broad topic. It's not a one size fits all.
Mhm.
But, what we see in this area with women, organizational change, and dealing with risk aversion is that the research says that women that typically want to advance to C suite or may already be there at senior levels of leadership, they oftentimes have found in research that women in general tend to harbor beliefs about taking risks.
Mm,
And so oftentimes that idea is approached negatively. And so because of that, they don't take risks. But the reason for that is probably the bigger answer to this question that you asked, because women encounter gender bias oftentimes, and it's a systemic issue which impacts upon their promotional opportunities and their level of perceived influence. And so
mm,
those decisions to take a risk are very heavy decisions to make, and oftentimes we tend to be more conservative with risk taking. But ultimately, and it's like cutting your nose off to spite your face. And so I work with my clients to be able to feel comfortable with making reasonable risks,
mm,
but also embracing the decisions that they make and trusting. This is again about an issue of confidence and about trust and kind of knowing what you bring to the table, trusting your ability to make those decisions. And if things don't work out, then being able to be resilient and bounce back from those setbacks. The other issue that research has identified in regards to women in advancement with these issues of organizational change and so forth is that women tend to de emphasize the emphasis upon gathering additional knowledge outside their role and scope. So if they say, hey, that's not my job, they're focused on being very good at what they do. They maybe focus on the technical aspects of what they do, but they maybe don't understand how that impacts the overall bottom line. And they may not understand how other aspects of the organization come together to further advance the bottom line. Not intentionally per se, but maybe because they haven't been given opportunities to learn the business. And so that's another piece is as women tend to be able to embrace the idea of learning more other than just their job, they're able to lead organizational change and lead initiatives, which helps to reinforce their ability to, create more diverse work environments from an individual level. The other problem is that um, I'm willing to do it, but will the organization allow me to do it? So this is where we talk about the phenomenon of a glass cliff. I don't know. Have you heard that
I
phenomena about
I
glass cliff?
have, but I really would love if you could talk more about it.
Okay. So essentially, the glass cliff has to do with women that are elevated to positions of leadership or power when things are going poorly.
Mm,
And what we've seen in the research is that disproportionately happens to women of color that take on higher positions of leadership. But in comparison, disproportionately also happens to women in general. So women that are getting an opportunity to throw their hat in the ring for the first time ever at the highest level in their leadership may be, heading the Titanic.
mm,
And so their career and the backs of all the women, all the women are on their back for being able to advocate for opportunities for the first woman or the first woman of color in leadership is pressing upon them when it comes to their success with completing these projects. So it's not just an easy opportunity to go to the next level and I'll learn as I go. There's a lot of pressure here. And so the glass cliff idea is that it's a make it or break it time in your career. And so that's what ends up happening that we see with women that take on these positions. And so it can sometimes feel like it's a forced choice, but what I want to encourage you is if you're in a situation like that, that you can either use this opportunity, like I said, to spearhead your career for further opportunities, which will open the door for other women, which would be great. Um, but if you take the situation, the position, the opportunity, the project, whatever it is, and it doesn't work out, is to think about how you'll respond to that in a way that's going to continue to set you up for future opportunities rather
Mm.
than having it seen and embraced as a failure. So, one of the things you can do is if you're presented with this opportunity is really understand what the challenge is that's being proposed. Okay. So if they say, hey, we want you to lead this new initiative, whatever, blah, 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 understand the full details of what they're asking you to do so you'll know exactly how thick you're in it, but also identify the resources that you're being given and then understand what needs to be allocated in order to execute properly. The other thing I would suggest is allyship. We hear a lot about allyship as it comes to promotion, but even once you're already in the position, allyship is extremely important. As you continue to build and establish relationships, think about the support systems that you need in place in order to continue to execute efficiently and appropriately. And think about networking as instrumental in your success. So this means that you're going to manage up as well as horizontally across the organization.
Mm.
The other thing I would suggest you do is own your value, own the value that you bring to the project and the venture, regardless of the outcome. Right? You recruited me because I have a history of putting out fires, making change. I have a history of leading initiatives that have never been done before. I deliver 150% when the request is for 100%. Own your value. And then a couple of these last things I would say is remember, even at this opportunity, this is probably when you have the most power,
Mm.
is negotiate and realize that this may be a stepping stone to another opportunity. So as you're coming out of this situation, think about where you're going next and start making those strategic steps to get there. And like I said, if you don't succeed, think about the reasons why that might have happened. Be clear about that and identify maybe even what you would have done differently or what was needed to be in place in order for you to arrive at a favorable outcome. All of these are learning opportunities for you, but more importantly, you just have to remember that you at this point in your career you've invested too much to let it go. So don't let this, if it is something that doesn't work out, be so catastrophic that you lose your desire to continue to pursue the next opportunity.
That's extremely powerful. And what you said is incredibly relatable, incredibly
Hmm.
relatable. I think that a lot of women struggle with this,
Hmm.
and as you said, definitely a lot of women of color. Um, as we're talking about, taking these types of risks, and
Hmm.
wow, you gave some really really good suggestions for going into that type of situation. Let's pivot just a little bit and
Hmm.
talk about going into looking for a promotion to begin with.
Yeah.
What are some of the barriers to promotion that even women in senior leadership face as
Hmm.
they're looking to advance in their careers?
Yes. I think we've talked about a lot of those as of yet as well already. But again, historical gender bias and stereotyping really has contributed to a lot of the structural barriers that further impact upon women advancing into senior leadership and even the C-suite. And the other piece is,
Mm.
limited access to traditional networking opportunities, having lack of female leadership networks. So not am I only just isolated because I may be the only one or one of few, but there may be opportunities to network that aren't available to me, or there's not enough women at my level, so um, I have to go outside my organization, and there may still be limited opportunities. I see this with a lot of my clients that work in tech. And there are also significant balance, significant challenges to balancing work and family. When I was working in the C-suite in my career, it was that challenge. I have very young children, and it was, do I go to this networking event after hours where everybody's smoking cigars? I don't smoke. uh, Knowing that I've got to get from here to there by this time to pick my child up from daycare. So
Mm.
there's a lot of us that deal with those issues of being able to balance work and family, and having that tethered to our desire to advance and not knowing how to do it all. The other piece, we talked about is that idea that we have, it's more than just, I'm good at my job, it's my time, I deserve it. What is the big picture? If you're going to go to this next level in your career, you don't have to be able to do everything perfectly. I maybe am not a expert in P&L responsibility, but I know who I need to hire who can do that. I may not be an expert in marketing and PR, but I know who I can hire that can do that. So thinking about how you have oversight rather than how you have to have your hands in everything is going to help you elevate your opportunity, and to be able to give you more access to advancing in your work. And that comes with this idea of risk aversion. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to do something I've never done before. The research says that women typically do not raise their hand for promotion because they don't think I'm ready yet. Where men, they'll jump in feet first. So that's a risk. You think, how can I take a risk for the organization where they'll see me as someone who's competent and capable? Well, I would say the first risk was take a risk on yourself.
Mm.
Invest in yourself. Think about how I can be the answer to that problem that they're trying to solve, and how I can best negotiate with my employer, my superior, whoever, to help them see that in me as well. So I would say, think about that risk aversion piece, get that dialed in. And then the other piece I touched on a bit was business acumen. That's another big barrier to women, is this piece about, I just do my job. I don't know what else goes on in the other departments or how it all works. Understanding business acumen and including P&L responsibility. Well, I may have basic business acumen, but I've never been given a job where I have P&L responsibility. And typically women aren't given those responsibilities. So that might be something you have to advocate for yourself for, to get other opportunities for that. And the other piece is lack of leadership development. We again kind of become myopic in our view and very tunnel visioned about doing our jobs and where we want to go and how we get there. But we forget that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And so we have to plan it out. And that's what leadership development does for us. It keeps us on track with identifying our goals for career advancement. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there in the research. You can go look it up. But the last piece is about women working collaboratively and with teams. And I think that goes back to that issue related to systemic bias and gender bias, because we think that, hey, if I work in a team, they're going to take credit for my work, so I'll do my own stuff.
Mm.
And women may feel also disproportionately that they got to carry the burden of collaboration. Oh, so and so, you're so good at that. Why don't you take notes for the group? Or so and so, why don't you do this or that? Because you're good in this area, relationships and what have you. And so and so, so you do this or that. And so then we end up feeling like we have to be the go between to get the work done. But this is where I say that you kind of got to use two very important skills for yourself, which is self-advocacy. You have to share mutuality. You have to have a sense that we're in this together. And then you got to clearly contract. That's the negotiation piece where you say, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're doing, this is how it all works together. And then the other piece is transparency, where, okay, once it's all done as a team and we're collaborating, this is what everybody contributed, and that's visible to others. So that's, Bob, you don't do your part, that's going to be visible. Sally, you don't do your part, everybody's going to know. And so you're able to mitigate risk of gender imbalance collaboration when you're transparent and when you use things like mutuality. So I've said all that to say, hey, Don't devalue your own contributions. Remember, you got to advocate for yourself. Make sure that your contributions are clear to the male collaborators you're working with. So it'll never be this, hey, I was pulling a May on my back here. I carried her because she doesn't know how to do this or that. It'll be like, no, 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 no. This is what I did. This is what I brought to the project. This is how it all works together. The other piece is don't be afraid to self promote. And then, hey, if you have to pull Bob aside privately and say, look, this is what I did, and clarify your role, do that. You can also give yourself a voice and a face and visibility by volunteering to be the spokesperson. Hey, this is all right, boo, boo, boo. I'll present it at the next board meeting. How about that? And then the last piece is allyship. Like I said, you want allyship not with just with male colleagues, but also your female colleagues, because research says that we as women sometimes we know that we're the only one or the one of few. So we may feel like we don't have time to develop and mentor or pour into other women because we're so concerned about how that affects our leadership and our positions. So you need to also find support and community with other women as well as men that can support you as you advance in your career.
That's fantastic. I really think that your approach and certainly the issues that you've talked about are so incredibly relevant for senior leaders. I certainly say this to someone who's worked in executive leadership myself, and
Mhm.
it just very, very, very powerful.
Thank you.
So what I want to ask you is, if I'm a female leader and I
Mhm.
want to develop in my career, if I want to have an opportunity, certainly to work with you,
Mhm.
what does that look like? What should I do? How should I connect?
Yes. So my team here today will be reaching out to people that have attended this event and giving you an opportunity that if you would like to get a consult with me to talk about your professional use, you can do that. You can also access information on my LinkedIn profile that gives you information regarding my details about how to schedule a consult. Or a third way you can reach me is that you can go to my website at www.dravsanchez.com.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, Dr. Sanchez, I have to tell you, this has been a pleasure. I really, really appreciate having spent the time with you with this, and I'm excited. I'm excited to
My
continue the
pleasure.
conversation.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. Thank you, everyone who was on today. And hopefully, for those of you that are watching here on the replay, if any of you have any questions, either live here or on the replay, feel free to drop those in the comments and I'll get back to you. All right. Take care. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.